I've asked Barb to lead off, talk a little bit about some of our recent polls, have each of the panelists say a few things from their unique perspectives. We will then open the floor for questions. There will not be a midterm later in the evening, but you do get extra points for participation, as all of you know who've been in our classes. So we encourage that. I turn it over to Barbara Carvalho.
Thank you very much, Lee. And it is wonderful to see so many familiar faces, friends, and also pollsters, past and current. Tonight, what I'd just like to do a little bit of is that the Marist poll, we have been polling the campaign of 2012 since the campaign of 2008. We did take a little bit of a break to also survey the campaign of 2010. But what I'd like to do is share with you some of the results from our national, which we do in partnership with the McClatchy News Service, and then also some of the some of our takeaways from the primary polls that we are doing in some of the first wave of states with NBC News. So what I'd like to start with is the incumbent president, and really to set the stage what a difference almost 4 years has made. I mean, in 2008, we didn't have an incumbent. We were looking at an electorate who was looking for change again. President Obama pretty much had everything going for him. An electorate that didn't very much like the incumbent party. We didn't have the incumbent president, but we had an incumbent party. An economic collapse, which was blamed on that incumbent party, and then also a very energized group of young voters, which he was able to tap into in a very new way as well. We've been seeing social media become more and more part of the campaigns over time, but 2008 was certainly another change in all of that. And even with all of that going for him, President Obama still only won with 53% of the popular vote. Certainly a large landslide in the Electoral College, but still just over 50% nationally. So what a difference almost 4 years makes. And some of the numbers that you have seen probably in the press and by other polling organizations as well, President Obama's approval rating certainly has some difficulty. You can see disapproval is still at half. His low point of 39% was just in September. When we take a look at how voters see him handling the economy, again, a lot of dissatisfaction, a lot of frustration. 59%, just a couple of ticks down from, again, the highest disapproval in September. And we also look at foreign affairs. Now, this is someplace where the president has had significant successes, and which both sides of the aisle agree on. But still, since he took office, where he had so much more support, it's been pretty flat over time. And at least in this instance, there is more positive support than negative. We also take a look at how people are feeling just overall in terms of the economy. And this is a number that has really hit an all-time high, again, just this September. People feeling that the country is going in the wrong direction and have been feeling that way. We had a little bit of what you're actually looking at is a decade of this number. And it had been very difficult for the wrong direction to go very much over 50%. But that is something that has really skyrocketed now and has been pretty consistently negative over the term of this incumbent. And then finally, we ask a question, and we started this just in the 2010 election, and we found that it was very useful in finding out whether the incumbent party was doing well in a particular state or not. And this is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? Is the worst behind us or is the worst still to come? And you can see that number does not bode well for incumbents in general and the president specifically. this frustration is not just laid at President Obama's doorstep. The congressional Democrats and Republicans certainly are not doing much better, and actually might enjoy the President Obama's approval rating. You can see that just over a quarter of the national electorate gives them good grades. And we are approaching the deadline of the super committee soon, and you can see this frustration. Only 13% of Americans actually are confident that the committee is going to make their deadline. We've seen in the last several years also several factions that have mobilized on both sides. Occupy Wall Street on the left, Tea Party supporters on the right, and not surprisingly, we also see that they have very different constituencies. Occupy is Democratic, it's liberal, it's younger, the Tea Party supporters being Republican, conservative, and older. But what we find what's very interesting is that when we ask everyone which comes closer to your view, it also shows you the polarization in the country as well. But of course, you have to beat somebody with somebody. And if you take a look at this list of cast of characters, and I guess if you look all the way over the right, I don't know how many of you actually remember back to Daniels, but these are the folks who didn't run for president on the Republican side this time around. And I think that's something that we're seeing also in these current contests. The GOP also is having some difficulty because of the fact that the candidate that seems to be the heir apparent to the nomination is seen as very weak. And we've all seen how he is having difficulty attracting conservatives. He is also flip-flopped on a number of very important issues, particularly social issues that are important to Republican voters. But more importantly even, when we have this out-of-step concept, Republican voters are really looking for a candidate that will share their values, that are with them on the issues. What the strength of Romney is that he is someone that people see as having experience and is the most likely to beat President Obama. And so that is not something that, although that's very important to Republican voters, that is not their top priority in terms of thinking about a candidate's characteristic that they want to support. And then, of course, his religion has been a concern, and it's not just in the Republican Party, but it has also been, that'll also be something that will also follow him into the general should he get the nomination. And then there's the anybody but Romney, and it really hasn't solidified around any particular candidate. You can see the latest of which is Newt Gingrich, who may be getting his few minutes in the race as well. But what this all translates to really is the dynamic that is in the Republican primary right now. And if we take a quick look, it's just some of the things that we've seen in our NBC polls. The nature of these likely voters who are going to turn out. In Iowa, it's a caucus. It's a small turnout. You can see the Tea Party is 50% of that electorate. Conservatives, 3/4. When we take a look at New Hampshire, which actually is a primary instead of a caucus, and also independents can vote in New Hampshire, still a good proportion are Tea Party supporters. But in New Hampshire, you have the smallest proportion of people who actually see themselves as Tea Party, conservative, and evangelical, all three combined. South Carolina, that is actually the only red state that we will see in the first group of 4 primary contests in January. And it's nice to be able to say in January, because when these things were going to occur was taking such a long time to figure out. But this will be a real test of traditional Republicans and a test of the South. And you can see 1 in 5 voters in South Carolina actually identify as one of those 3 groups at the bottom. And finally, Florida. Certainly no one ever has any trouble with Florida. So a state that will be very, very important come general election time. Again, a lot of Tea Party support there. It's a closed primary, which means only Republicans will be voting in the Florida primary. And interestingly there, when we look at Romney's support, he's getting about what he got 4 years ago. So where do things stand? In our latest McClatchy News Marist poll, we did the generic contest, which is, do voters support Obama's reelection or not? And as you can see, there's a plurality and a larger proportion that do not. However, when we put the current Republicans against him, it is a very competitive race. And the president does have a very narrow edge, certainly against Romney and Kaine, but is neck and neck right now with Newt Gingrich. So where does that leave us? Just a couple of questions that I think we will probably discuss this evening, but who will be able to unify their base? Who can mobilize their base? The president will be certainly very dependent upon younger voters, energizing them again, and minority voters, Latino voters, and African American voters, and then also where will the middle go? Will they still put their trust in President Obama as they did last time, or will they want change again, even if they're not sure they can believe in it? So that's an overview of where the contests are right now, and I throw it back to Lee.
Okay, thank you, Barb. Why don't we, Glenn, incumbents define the landscape. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the mood at the White House lately. They're obviously back in campaign mode, and how that has sort of changed or maybe shifted their outlook.
Well, I will say the White House is a fairly empty place these days. The president isn't around very much, and it seems like every week we lose another senior administration official, or a senior administration official announces that they want to get out of Dodge. Part of the reason is it's just terrible to be in the West Wing for a long period of time. But the other crucial element here is all of the senior people in the White House who've been running the government for the last 3 years are essentially campaign people, and they feel much more comfortable in a campaign environment than they do in an environment of governance. As we have seen, as people on the Hill will be more than happy to tell you. So they, I think, are feeling very energized. The president's favorite phrase on this is the 2012 election will be not a referendum on the almighty, but a discussion of the alternatives. And that is really what they are angling for here. And they are quite happy with the situation right now, with Romney being the sort of wounded, undesirable frontrunner, and the seven dwarfs. How many are there?
I'm not sure.
Sort of pining for the spot to compete against them. I think there was a great deal of trepidation in the White House about Rick Perry when he came to the fore. I think they felt that he was the most dangerous, just on his capacity as a retail politician, and they were very pleased with the way that he flamed out, and they are ecstatic at this Herman Cain situation, the Newt Gingrich situation. So paradoxically, the economy is still in the toilet. Foreign affairs are terrible. We have this awful situation brewing in Europe, and they're pretty happy with where they are.
Consider the alternatives. Good, thank you, and we'll get back and. Do recall, we will be opening up to you shortly as well. Steve, every time I speak to you, you're either on your way to New Hampshire, just coming back from Iowa, in South Carolina. What's the reception out there that these Republican candidates are getting? This mini-series, the race for the GOP nomination, seems to have a new installment every week. So what's the sense of the electorate and these Republican candidates who are vying to get the nomination to run against Obama?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I just got back from about 5-6 days in South Carolina and a week in Iowa before that. My sense is a slight shift. Clearly, 3 out of 4 Republicans in these early states are very tuned in. They're great consumers of politics. That's why reporters love to talk to them, because they know what they're talking about. They pay attention. They're still shopping. They know there's still 7 weeks till their version of Christmas Day to buy the gift. We've been reading it as kind of 3 out of 4 are against Romney, the anyone but Romney. He gets about 20, 23, 24% of the vote. The rest goes somewhere else. Newt Gingrich has been talking about that a lot in the last couple of days, that all I need is some of that 85% and I can win. I'm not entirely sure that's true. I've been finding Republicans in those 2 states in my 2 recent trips more of them receptive and open to Romney. These are non-Romney voters. These are people showing up to see Gingrich or Kaine or Bachmann or Santorum. And it's the first time all year that I've found them saying, but I could vote for Romney. 3-4 months ago, they wouldn't say that at all. They would list all the things they don't like about Mitt Romney, the flip-flopping, the health care, whatever the reasons. But I find more and more, I had a number of people at a Gingrich event in Greenville, South Carolina, tell me, I'm looking at Gingrich or Romney. I had a few tell me it's still Kaine or Romney, although clearly I had particularly Republican women tell me they're cooling to his candidacy. But I think Barbara raised an interesting point. Which one of them can get the base? And Lee, we talked about this yesterday. Romney doesn't poll as well among Republicans when matched against Obama. That's one of the reasons right now Newt Gingrich polls a little better against Obama than Romney is, because Gingrich gets more of the Republicans. But I agree with you, Lee. I think those Republicans will come home to Mitt Romney the day after the nomination. And it won't be that they're motivated by him, but they'll be motivated by Barack Obama. I think that'll be an overwhelming force.
Okay, good. Thank you. And I keep calling him Steve. His name's actually Buzz, but that's a different story. Later on, we have a few minutes. We may find out why he is Buzz, but we'll get there later, perhaps. Beth, you tweeted about 2 weeks ago during Herman Cain's, the whole sexual harassment thing that we were, any moment now we were going to see Mrs. Cain. You're right. This week, she appeared on the campaign for the first time, speaking on behalf of her husband. For all the revolution that's gone on in campaign politics, that sort of seems to be page 1 out of the campaign consultant manual. So, could you comment a little bit about, as you've seen these campaigns unfold, not only this time, but in recent elections, just how much is changing out there? Barb alluded to the, social media as being so important, and yet this seemed to be just, politics as usual in terms of how they were trying to handle damage control.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of changes in tactics, social media, the influence of the internet, the what's going on in the country, the economy, overseas, and so forth. They're all going to have bearing on any particular campaign you're covering. However, there are some basics that are always going to be there, and the issue of character is extremely important. And I think as reporters we don't talk about that enough, that character is extremely important to voters. They're not just looking for a set of issues that they agree with or don't agree with. And someone is measured in large part through their character, through their family, and through their spouse and their relationship with their spouse. So people always want to know something about the candidate's family, their wife, their husband. She had been absent, almost entirely absent. This is Herman Cain's wife, Gloria, through the entire campaign. She came out to support him when he announced back in the spring, but has never been seen since, except when she went on Greta the other night, and then only under duress. He had made clear throughout the campaign that she wanted no part of it, that it was his campaign to run. She wanted to stay back at their home in Atlanta. She had to step forward if he was going to have any chance of surviving this revelation by Politico that he had apparently been accused of sexually harassing employees. So she did step forward very reluctantly. She looked great and seemed like a really interesting, classy person. That may help him. We have a little bit of a history with this. Howard Dean, and I would argue, we can have this conversation perhaps as we go along, that the 2004 campaign is sort of the mirror image of the campaign we're going through now, 2012. In 2004, Howard Dean, who was the flavor of the month for quite some time for Democrats who didn't want to coalesce around John Kerry, he was sort of the Mitt Romney of the 2004 election. Howard Dean's wife was absent from the campaign trail, refused to campaign, and you could Monday morning quarterback like why the Dean campaign fell apart. But I think voters are uncomfortable not knowing the fully fleshed out, three-dimensional person that a candidate is, and they are in large part measured by who they're married to. And when the wife doesn't step forward, that raises lots of questions, particularly when there's an allegation of sexual harassment. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, very interesting. You mentioned character, and I know you've all been involved in, prior presidential campaigns. If we just, reflect on Hillary Clinton for a second, are any of you surprised, or how surprised are you that after 2008, she would then move into the State Department, perform so admirably after what went on, as sort of a message as to what might happen later down the road when the Republicans start healing and coalescing? That was sort of like startling that the two of them sort of found their peace. you Hillary folks.
I'm not surprised. The thing that intrigues me is, going back to 2008, she was ruled out as a vice presidential candidate for all these reasons. Bill Clinton would overshadow. You'd never know who was involved, and yet state isn't that dissimilar from vice president. And it seems to me she could have done the job as vice president as easily as she's done the State Department.
I think Glenn's going to disagree with me. We were colleagues on the Hillary plane.
Say for how long?
Well, I was out there for forever. I was there till the day she dropped, June 7th, 2008. So I was on the campaign from January 20th of 2007 till June 8th of 2008.
I was placed a couple of weeks before the end of the campaign. I was placed in a sanatorium.
So you missed that part.
It was a very difficult campaign to cover. We were all kind of headed for the sanatorium. My own view, I mean, she's perceived as so haughty and such a diva and such a force unto herself. I think she's also very much sort of a good girl who does what is asked of her. And the president asked her to do this job, and she was not going to fail at this job. She was going to do a good job, and she was going to take her place and do it the way that it would reflect best on her and best on the country. She's a pleaser, I think. Ultimately, she's a girl who sits in the front row of the class and raises her hand. And
why would you think I disagree with you?
I think you see more.
Well, Dan Balls coined the great line during the campaign that she's the girl with the responsibility gene, right?
The responsibility gene.
And she's
exactly.
the one who cleans up other people's messes. I don't need to elaborate on that one, but the I think. I mean, the one, not literally. I mean, the one issue in which she's really being brought up these days is the conjecture that there will be this like October surprise, and she will replace Joe Biden as the vice presidential candidate. I can tell you from everything that I know, unless things go completely off the rails, there's no chance of that happening. And I think that would be a bridge too far for her. I'm not sure that she would say yes to that.
Do you all agree? Do you think that, I mean, we won't put her in our next questionnaire if you think she has no chance of being...
Sure we will.
Sure we will.
You totally should.
Is it newsworthy? Yeah. Sure it is. We'll use it.
My understanding is that the relationship between the president and Vice President Biden is one of the strongest and best in the administration, that it was a shotgun marriage, arranged marriage, like all of these tickets are. But they have really warmed to one another. They are genuinely very fond of each other. And Biden brings a lot to the table politically for Obama. He's the bridge to the conservative, white, ethnic, Catholic, middle-class voters who have had their issues with Obama right from the beginning.
And if he wants to do the Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan...
It's wonderful.
Which he has to.
Yeah.
Which he has to do. And if he can't do the Virginia, Colorado thing, if that doesn't work out. You said in the end, Hillary, did what she needed to do for the team. So we've been watching, all of us have been, these Republican debates. And the first couple debates was all about President Obama. We're going to beat up Obama. The last 5 or 6 of these things, they've been focusing more on each other until the most recent one. But what's your sense of the mood in these campaigns? And, they seem to have lost their target. Some of these gaffes are taking attention perhaps away from Romney. As periodically we focus in on other things, and maybe he's getting a little bit better ride. Do you think they're going to all come together at the end, or is there going to be bad feelings as a result of some of the fisticuffs that have been going on?
Yeah. I think the tension is rising as we get closer to Iowa on January 3rd.
Okay.
I thought at the South Carolina debate last weekend, Michelle Bachmann in particular reacted very negative, very angrily. That she didn't get enough questions. First her campaign manager came into the spin room afterward and was swearing about CBS being biased and used a lot of profanity and demanded that they be fired from CBS. Then she came in, and usually the candidate doesn't do that herself, but she did all without the profanity. Then put out a written statement complaining about the bias, that she wasn't asked questions, and stuck with it. And I think it bespoke the fact she knows time's running out, that she needs airtime, as does Rick Santorum, as does John Huntsman, as does anyone else who's not in that center stage this week. And that center stage is always determined by who's up in the polls. Back in August, it was Michelle Bachmann at center. Now it's Newt Gingrich and Mitt Romney. And so among all the people who are not Romney, they see the clock ticking. And if they're not up there at 20%, they're getting panicky, and it's very stressful. And I think it'll get increasingly, the elbows will be out, and they'll have to go after one another more.
Yeah.
Do you think Romney is inevitable?
As the nominee? Mm-hmm. Oh, no. My sense, and I mean, some of this is in the polling and some of it's on the ground in the states, that these voters are really shopping. I mean, I think it's very soft. I think these early states, Iowa and South Carolina particularly, could go anyway. We see now Iowa could be a 4-person race, which means who knows what's going to happen in the last week.
Well, they always say there are 3 tickets out of Iowa.
Right.
Are there still 3 tickets, or are there going to be 4 this time?
If they were close, there's 4 tickets out of Iowa. Just because my head's in South Carolina because I was just there, I know that South Carolina is probably again going to be the pivotal state. Assume that Iowa goes to a more conservative candidate, whether it's I guess you could put Gingrich in that category, or Santorum, or Kane, and then assume that Romney wins New Hampshire. South Carolina, as it has every time since 1980, sets the course then and picks the nominee.
Yeah, there probably are multiple tickets out of Iowa, but then you have to look at what the candidates have ready for them when they leave. Do they have an infrastructure in those states? Do they have the money that's necessary to keep going? Just because you get a nice little burst of headwind out of Iowa, you need some level of infrastructure to keep moving you along. There's not a lot of evidence that Michelle Bachmann's got anything beyond Iowa, right? New Hampshire is all John Huntsman's focusing on. So he might not do well in Iowa. He's barely campaigning there, but the thinking is he could wrap up a lot of those independent voters who can vote in the primary in New Hampshire. So he's focusing all his resources there. It's a rare candidate that's got the money to really run strongly in all the big states that are starting the process, especially when you get to Florida, which just could sink almost anybody. It's such a money pit.
I think Florida is. Just because I want to pick a fight, I'll pick a fight with Steve. No, I think Florida is when you start looking at the map, I think Florida could actually be decisive here, because it will be proof of a candidate that can run in a state, run convincingly a state of that scale, and a state that's going to be a battleground in the general. And I think to a certain extent, Iowa is everything to a certain extent. Iowa and New Hampshire were very important in 2008 because it was Barack Obama proving to the Democratic Party, proving even to African American voters that he could be competitive. I think each one of these states you can sort of write off to a particular quirk of demographics, a moment in time, or a particular characteristic of the candidate. I think when you and I think this will be Romney's argument, I think when you get to Florida, the argument is going to be this is where the big boys or big girls play.
Will candidates be able to ride the bubble a little more this time than they have been able in the past? I know money is important in politics, and this is going to shift from the free media, so to speak, to paid media. But is it a little different this time, coming around with the strength of some of these groups, the internet and online infrastructure of these different factions, that perhaps a candidate that does get some headwind from a win or from doing well in a state, that they might be able to ride their bubble through a state without an infrastructure and without as much money perhaps as a front runner?
I think it's very possible. I think this campaign could be very different. I think the fact that so many candidates in the Republican field are doing so well without $1, and they're doing it entirely off the debates, off national television exposure, that every one of these debates, even CBS's Saturday night debate in South Carolina on a day when South Carolina and Clemson were both playing pivotal football games, and they cut off the debate after 1 hour to show a rerun, still drew 5 million viewers. Republicans, much like Democrats in 2004, are so hungry, they're so tuned in, and you add to that, they're watching the television, and you add the social media, the viral videos, the Herman Cain at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel freezing up on the Libya question, and everyone watches that. They see it all, and I think they will pay attention, and I think there will be a bubble that will surpass, or could surpass, the ability of Rick Perry, for instance, to buy enough TV ads to get through that.
Yeah, but I would also say that the other new big thing that's defining this campaign are the emergence of super PACs. And that's going to radically change what we've seen in campaigns in the past. You guys probably know that because of the Citizens United ruling, these independent groups have been allowed to form that can raise and spend unlimited money on behalf of another candidate, on behalf of a candidate, as long as they don't coordinate with the candidate in the official campaign. We've got a lot of super PACs out there. Romney's got one. Perry's got one, and they're already on the air. John Huntsman's got one. His has started to go up in the air in New Hampshire. These are both going to echo the messages from the candidates themselves, but they're also potentially going to be the attack engines. Mm-hmm. And you could see any one of these super PACs going really negative on another candidate. You know, a Perry would never say, a Mormon can't be elected president. You would never hear those words out of his mouth. But who knows? Maybe a super PAC might form that would be willing to say that on the air. We just don't know. This is a totally uncharted territory, and that's where things could get very, very ugly.
So we should look not just at what money the campaigns are raising for themselves in these quarterly filings, but also some of this other stuff.
It's a huge component.
Now, I have a somewhat self-serving question to ask, and then I want to open it up to the folks. How long do you think this primary season's going to go? And how much should I budget for polling to account for that? Are we going to go past Florida, or are we going to do the whole Hillary
We were really
Obama
hoping
thing?
that Florida would be it.
Florida would be nice. We get a lot of attention up till then, and then we can sort of go about our teaching business. But what do you guys think? What's your sense of how long this thing's going to go? Is this going to be like last time with Obama and Clinton, all the way to June, or are we going to wrap up early? What's your sense of this?
March 15th.
The Ides of March.
I have no idea what day of the week that is. No, I think Florida's only decisive if it's Romney.
Okay. If
he comes out of New Hampshire strong and then wraps up Florida. But if it's not, if Romney wins New Hampshire and Florida goes a different direction, then I can go in a month or two beyond that easily. Okay.
I don't really know, largely because what the Republicans used to do was they'd have winner-take-all primaries, and that made a big difference. I mean, McCain was able to wrap up his run in 2008 very early because he won enough states that had winner-take-all primaries that he got enough delegates, and that was all she wrote. Whereas the Democrats, their delegates were apportioned differently, and that's one of the reasons why it had to go as long as it did. Now that this has changed in some states, and I don't know enough about which of these early states the changes have been enacted enough that potentially we could have some winners come out of these states and yet still not amass enough delegates to win early.
April 1st.
Is that
Okay,
right, Jen?
okay, so there you go. Split the difference between January and June. That's a nice intermediate spot. Budget till April 1st.
Okay, good. Okay, done. And then the Miringoff Carvalho vacation fund and things of that sort. Let me open it up. I just want everybody to know, I understand that the New Hampshire Lotto, is this true for Monday? The Lotto numbers were 999 in New Hampshire, the winning Lotto ticket. Is that true? I read that. Yes, it is true. I don't know if we should read anything into that or not. But anyway, let me open it up and feel free to ask. Oh, I'm sorry. I should point out that there are people, Daniela and Sue, with microphones. Raise your hand. They'll escort you to the aisle, and you can ask your question. Yeah, right there, sir.
How are you?
You're already on the aisle, so you can.
I have a really interesting question because the 53% that you quoted at the beginning, which I think a lot of people don't realize it wasn't that big of a landslide. I'm interested in the youth vote. For all the sort of hubbub, if I'm not mistaken, the youth vote really wasn't that much bigger than the Gore than for Gore, right? So how big will this play? Because now one would think that perhaps that youth vote is not as motivated as they were in 2008.
Let me call in a lifeline on this initially, if I might. Joe Lenski is sitting here. Sorry, Joe, to do this to you. But Joe is the one who runs the consortium, does the exit polls for all the networks and stuff. He's right here, Sue. Could you get a mic to Joe? And maybe you could comment on, give us a little historical perspective on youth vote.
And just how significant it was in terms of Obama's
well, it was
win.
significant for the Democrats in 06 and 08, but it's never as significant as people think it's going to be. I mean, Obama did move the needle but it may be 1% more of the electorate, 2% more of the electorate than it was in 2004 for Kerry. So it's a big margin for Obama, but the size of the 18 to 29 vote is never much more than 10, 11, 12%. If you move it from 11% to 12%, you've made a big move.
But if you took it out of the
equation,
the equation, in other words, if you didn't count anybody under 30 who voted, we would, I believe, have President McCain.
It would have been really close. Yeah.
But,
and the other thing that's happened is on the other end, older voters have gotten more and more Republican over the year, which is a difference from how it was.
well, that's fascinating because of also the Medicare stuff, but how that cuts both ways.
Thanks, Joe.
But the other issue, I think, in addition is not just about the youth vote, it's about youth participation in the campaign. Because I was out in Colorado recently, and there was a big concern from some of the Obama campaign officials that they just weren't able to energize the campus volunteers as much. And those volunteers were the army that they had knocking doors in neighborhoods. It allowed them to do multiple contacts with voters and phone banks. So to a certain extent, obviously, it played a critical role in terms of the voting patterns, but this is the Obama army we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anybody else want to jump in? Or no? Okay. I'm sorry. Yes. Humphrey,
a question about the general election.
Humphrey Taylor of the Harris Poll.
Thank you. The assumption is that the big issue is going to be the economy, but of course in the primary debate so far, there have been a lot of other issues, including, of course, the personal quirks of the candidates. Would you like to speculate about what else, apart from the economy, might be important issues in the general election?
Well, we could have another, God forbid, terrorist attack, I suppose. That's always weighing on the minds of many voters. Is the country in danger? And how would that change the electoral equation? That's not something any of us want to envision, but certainly out there. It's also just, it's a referendum on 4 years of a presidency. We didn't have that 4 years ago. It was an open race, and this is a very different situation when we have a record. Somebody's running with a record, and they have to defend that record.
Mm-hmm. I think foreign policy will be more of a debate in the general election than it is right now, but it'll come from the Democrats. I think the president's numbers are pretty good on foreign policy. I know the Marist number is only, I think, 49-45 approval, but if you ask terrorism, for instance, I think it tops 60% approval of Barack Obama for fighting terrorism. So particularly if he has some of these super PACs with some money, one of them headed by his former deputy press secretary hasn't raised much money yet, but I could see a lot of ads reminding voters who killed Osama bin Laden, who got Libya liberated. I could see that becoming an issue in the fall, and it's an interesting switch for a Democrat if he's pitching for policy strength.
Immigration, I would say, is a very significant one. Healthcare, probably less so.
I was just going to ask about healthcare. Yeah. The Supreme Court in the fall presumably will decide on the whole healthcare thing, and that's sort of an interesting timing and all that.
I think the healthcare thing, I mean, the main thing about the healthcare thing is it's like those Friday the 13th movies. It just keeps coming back, and I think people have a real sense of wanting it to go away, including a lot of people on the Obama campaign. But I think the immigration issue, particularly in the states where the president hopes to make up some lost ground, particularly he has this fantasy about Arizona. But certainly New Mexico and Colorado, and in North Carolina and Virginia, they're not insignificant portions of the population.
In Florida.
In Florida, obviously.
And I would also just say something that's a little more ephemeral, which is the sense of whether people are feeling positive about the future. And that may be, economically, personally, whether they feel that we're moving forward and that there is something that's going to be changing in the future. When we saw the worst numbers for President Obama and the worst numbers on the economy, it was just this past fall. We got past the summer. In the spring, there had been this optimism that somehow we had turned the corner and we were going to see things improve. And when those numbers didn't really improve through the summer months, we really saw this pessimism set in, that perhaps the worst wasn't over. So that sense of whether things are getting better and whether there is some hopefulness for the future, I think will play a big part of the fall campaign and how voters react to the candidates.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, well, yes, Wayne. Wayne Caput, CBS Radio.
Hi. Assuming unemployment stays at 9%.
Can you hear, excuse me, you hear that radio voice there? I mean.
At 9% unemployment, assuming that it doesn't improve, let's hope that it does, can Obama get reelected next year?
Yeah, well, of course you can, depending on who the Republicans nominate. I mean, that's his best hope right now. I mean, you know, everyone in the White House was very candid how much they wanted Sarah Palin as their opponent. They didn't get that. They spent a lot of the summer very ecstatic when Michelle Bachmann was in the lead. They wanted to run against her, and now, of course, they're spending 98% of their energy trying to soften up Mitt Romney. I'm not sure that signals they think he's weak or strong, but a lot of it will depend on who the Republicans nominate. I think the other issue is, as we're reminded occasionally, that Washington is still trying to govern, that not everything is in the campaign. The debates over the super committee and the debt reduction and taxes, I think, put the president in a good position. I think particularly on taxes, based on polling largely, but also some interviews. I don't talk to many Democrats right now, but he's much stronger on those issues.
Neither does he. And there's been like a lot of, I mean, the thing that's happening that's encouraging the White House a great deal are these cracks in the Republican, I think the silent treatment and the fact that he's removing himself from the direct negotiations is freaking the Republicans out. They don't like the polling. You saw Lamar Alexander come out today and say that he was willing for more, to throw more revenue/taxation into this package. I personally think like that 13% number and some of the, you know, the horror show what was it, the Nader was 9% approval rating, that one national poll had it, is actually really helpful in terms of governance. I think low expectations is almost a commodity in Washington at this point in time. When people get so pessimistic and they think, it's almost like the stock market. It's like when people really throw in the towel, there's a sense that something can happen. So I wouldn't put my money on the super committee coming up with anything, but I put someone else's money on it.
Yeah, I mean, I know that number is, that 9% number is certainly unprecedented. I mean, what was it? Reagan won in '84 when it was 7 point something unemployment, and he won on a landslide. He won 49 states. So to say, oh, nobody's ever won with it this high, well, you know, that's only one data point. It also depends on if things feel like they're getting better. Yep. I think that has a huge impact on voter attitudes, so sort of just like psychology of the voter, and you know whether he's got a decent opponent or not, as Steve said.
And not to have a statistics course, but analyses of how much the economy impacts presidential elections have actually shown that even when we pile all of the economic factors into our models, it still accounts for only about 40% of why people vote for a candidate. And so you still have that other 60%, which is all of the issues I think that we've been talking about here. The mood, immigration, I mean, particular issues, healthcare. I mean, all of those things factor in together. So, yes, a president can certainly overcome the unemployment figures.
Yeah. I'm sorry, why don't we take another one from this side and we'll come back there.
One more.
Hi, my name's Chris. And by the way, I love the way you defined it. Quirks of the candidacies. It's fantastic. The super PAC money. It's the first time that this is really going to have an impact. And people measure how the campaigns are financed, but there's this big unknown out there. It's sort of like, who's leading in the super PAC race, and how influential is that really going to be?
You know, that's a funny and interesting question. We don't really know the answer to that because of the way the campaign finance rules are set up. They don't have to. They only have to disclose in July and in January. So we won't know till the end of January who's financing the super PACs. We won't know the names of any of the donors or how much they raised. So we're literally going to go through the first part of this very important primary season, not knowing anything about the super PACs, where they're getting their money, how much they have. It's all shrouded in mystery.
Yeah, well, Sue, I'm sorry. You want to take? You're up there. I won't make you fly down the steps. Why don't you do that? Take up there, and then we'll come back down.
Yes, hi. My concern is with the quality of the opposition, particularly the Republican candidates. So the question is, where is the beef on their side? in your analysis, do any of the Republicans who are running for presidency realize that the current president has committed a whole slew of impeachable offenses? And two, do any of these candidates support a return to the Glass-Steagall Act, which is in Congress? So my question is, where's the beef on the Republican side?
Glass-Steagall and impeachment? Wow.
You take Glass-Steagall.
Is the Glass-Steagall half empty? I don't know about the impeachment thing. Don't even go there, please. But I think on the Glass-Steagall issue, that is a remarkably interesting factor because your senator, and formerly my senator, I grew up a block and a half from him in Brooklyn, Chuck Schumer, played a significant role in the repeal of Glass-Steagall, which looked like a great idea at the time in the 90s.
Can you talk a little bit about what it is? So just
separating the vanilla functions of normal banking with these more adventurous, shall we say, and complicated investments that banks made, which created this cycle of leveraging, which interplayed with these issues involving mortgages and these exotic mortgage-related securities. Glass-Steagall, which dated from the days of the Great Depression, one of the first pieces of legislation implemented by the Roosevelt administration, put a firewall between those functions. And the Democrats in the go-go 90s removed that firewall. Now, there's a very interesting story that goes with this that I will not bore you with the details, but essentially, the Democratic resurgence in the House and Senate, led by Chuck Schumer and Rahm Emanuel in the House, were fueled by Wall Street money. The Democrats succeeded in the 1990s, partially because of their support of the repeal of Glass-Steagall in aligning Wall Street with the Democratic Party. So that is an enormously interesting question, and it's one the president has asked occasionally and has not really come up with a tremendously full answer on. But it's also interesting that you have this Glass-Steagall issue, and you have the issue involving the super PACs and the Citizens United case, which I think are issues that this Occupy Wall Street movement seems to be on the cusp of addressing. So if those things get put together in an interesting way, I think President Obama may have some questions to answer.
Okay, thank you. Sue, right in the front row. Ms. Johnson.
Hi. As a young person who voted for the first time in 2008, I know that something that was extremely influential among my peers and people in general was the cool factor that President Obama had and his support from various celebrities and very influential people in the media. I'm just wondering, do you think that he is going to... It seems that that's been scaled back a bit in the years of his presidency. I don't really hear as much vocal support for him now from celebrities and influential figures. Do you think he's going to be able to still tap into that resource, or do you think that might make him seem out of touch now, especially with all the economic issues this country has been having? Do you think that is really going to put people off and not really have as much of a positive effect on them anymore?
Who would you like to see endorse him among celebrities?
I'm a Republican. So.
Okay, who would you not want to see?
Good question.
That's good. I'd have to think about that.
Okay.
I have just an anecdotal thought about that, which is in the Bill Clinton years, at the White House Correspondents Association dinner every spring, virtually all of Hollywood came to the dinner. And it feels like fewer of them are coming to Barack Obama's
Steve
dinner.
Buscemi. I met Steve Buscemi.
And he talks about you now to this day.
I met Ryan Seacrest. I don't know. I thought he was a pretty big celebrity.
There are some.
Who's that guy at our table?
I saw you. No, I literally told people, holy cow, Lee Miringoff, is it?
That and who's the guy from that TV
Big Bang Theory.
Big Bang Theory. I thought this was some physicist.
But
until I got back to my office.
It's this MIT. You can't get the stink of MIT off of you.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'm not sure he can spell MIT, but okay.
Some of it, but I don't think he has what Bill Clinton had.
He still has Will.i.am, as far as I know.
Well, but he also, he's going around at fundraisers saying it's not going to be as cool this time. It's not going to be the hip campaign. Right. He's working to make sure nobody thinks he's going to be as, as cool as he was.
And he's not cool, so that helps.
All right.
What about the role of celebrities in campaigns?
See, I don't think they play that big a role anyway. I mean, I think they help. They're good for good fundraising magnets. I mean, in New York, maybe certainly in LA, if you find out that Jennifer Aniston and Bruce Springsteen are going to be at a fundraiser, you might be willing to fork over the $31.5 to go.
Is the Barack Obama that we see from afar close to the Barack Obama that you see up close? I mean, is this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the other part of that is an interesting thing. I think he may have had more cool factor in 2008 because he was new and unknown. And he's more familiar now, and he's a very steady guy. He's not Bill Clinton, he's not George W. Bush. The highs aren't very high, the lows aren't very low. I wouldn't say monotonous because it's such a pejorative term, but there's just not a lot of excitement when he walks in, except for the fact that he's the president. Every president has that. Having watched a few of them, I don't think he has quite what some of the others had in that regard.
He's kind of like a human iPad. I mean, he's like, there's a very Apple quality about the guy. I mean, I'm reading the Steve Jobs biography, so it's on my mind, but Steve Jobs was all about the closed box, about creating something which was aesthetically pleasing and somewhat enigmatic, And I think, but functional, and I think he kind of fits those various categories. That's my little pet there.
Well, and also he was running against Hillary in the primary, who was, to some people's minds, yesterday's news, part of the Clinton years. And then in the general, he had John McCain, who was in his 70s and was reminiscing about, World War II. I mean, it's not literally, but I mean, there just was
yes,
very
literally.
Very sharp contrast
Right.
between the two candidacies in each case.
So if we've had 3 change elections, 06, 08, and 10. And they were all about energy and enthusiasm from both sides of the political sides of things. Is this one about who can tap into some of the frustration? I mean, it seems to be a very different election mood generally than the 3. I mean, there's still agitation, but it seems to be more frustration this time. I don't know.
Well, wasn't there, I mean, 08 was driven in part about frustration, anger, unhappiness with the incumbent party, and Barack Obama offered an alternative that mixed what he called hope and change. I don't see that on the Republican side. I don't see the hope and change element. I see the motivation of anger, whatever it is, at the incumbent party. I haven't seen the flip side of that coin. That may come in the general election. It may come from Romney or whoever wins the nomination. But I haven't seen that Obama or Reagan kind of quality.
I also really think it's very much a mirror of 04. It just flipped on its head. We've got an incumbent president who's loathed by the opposition party, but you have a sort of a field of candidates vying to replace him who are nobody's that excited about the front runner, Romney. He's the Kerry equivalent. You've got the flavor of the month person popping up every once in a while. That was the role that Howard Dean played. Everybody does then rally. I mean, they'll get through it. The Republicans will nominate someone, and then it's going to be just a very tough, probably very close election that could get very negative, as it did in 04, and end very closely.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Sue, why don't you right there? Was that my wife's hand up for a second? Okay, you're next. Okay.
I just want to know your feelings on the Get Money Out campaign that was started by Dylan and Radigan about 6-8 weeks ago. It's got about 400,000 digital signatures.
Is this with the credit unions and the Bank of America thing?
No. It's about getting money out of the election process.
I don't know enough about it to comment, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Do you think that there'll be an independent party do you think someone may enter, another candidate may enter, and could there be a third party candidacy?
How old's Ross Perot?
We'll see how this thing goes with Mike Bloomberg and the Zuccotti Park. I'm just one of the things, and it's sort of a question I'd like to pose to both of you. I see the Republican Party being in trouble, like long term, and I think some of what's gone on the Hill in terms of John Boehner not being able to control the Tea Party faction and these freshmen which is changing somewhat now, really illustrates that there is a fundamental difference between sort of the governing branch of the Republican Party and the Tea Party / talk radio branch, a branch that still has its hands on the mechanism of government and wants to have power, and a branch that's much more of a primal scream. And I just would love to ask you guys as pollsters, do you think that those two really can reconcile themselves?
Right now the split is pretty serious, but that's also during the primaries. Right. The unity will come if it does, because they're then going to be running against Obama. I assume if Romney ends up the nominee, he picks a very conservative running mate and tries to offer the conservative wing of the party, every Supreme Court pick you have and all those kinds of things. If it's not Romney, then that individual is going to have a tough time moving to the center, I would think.
I would just see it a little bit differently. I see it as a difference between the governing body and kind of almost the rank and file Republicans. What we do see in our polling is that when we look at the Tea Party, they're really not this kind of radical fringe part of the Republican Party. They are certainly where the energy is, but they are also very traditional Republicans in the sense that these are the people who have participated in primaries and caucuses in the past. These are the people who we see really match up and are part of the Republican organizations in that state. I see the difference more between Washington Republicans and then these state Republicans, because in the primaries and caucuses, these are the folks that have been there, and they're kind of rebranded themselves as Tea Party people, but they are what are active and energized.
And this
Republicans.
may play out in some primary challenges to first-time Republican Tea Party winners last time by Tea Party voters back home in their district. I mean, to turn the page.
So we see it as this, kind of this surge that's coming into the process. But in fact, we were actually very surprised when we looked at our Iowa polling that in fact these are the people who are part of the caucus process and have been for quite some time.
Yeah, this gentleman here, you've had your hand up for a while.
Hi, thanks. My name is Sheldon. I have a question for you. Speaking of low expectations, let's talk about Congress, because how much lower can they get? I wonder if the sentiment that we're seeing in the national polling has dropped down to, is it going to be a throw the bums out year, or are we going to have a 96% retention rate in terms of incumbents, because that's a very specific ballot, especially in the Senate, but in the House as well. I mean, where the actual work of government is supposed to happen. Do we see that in terms of the polling and in terms of the journalistic perspective in your conversations with voters? Have you seen that?
Or should incumbents be running scared on the Hill?
Yeah, I haven't looked at the congressional races at all.
I would say, if you've got a few things going on this time. It's the first election after the redistricting. So every state's congressional maps are undergoing a lot of changes. So that's going to have an impact on the races. You've got a whole lot of people who were elected in 10 that shouldn't have been, based on the partisan makeup of their district, that they're more Republican than their district. So the House Democratic Campaign Committee feels like they've got a shot at taking back the House, simply because there's a number of people in congressional seats who don't particularly fit the district and just were blown in there by the big surge of Republican support in 10. So there's all of that going on. I mean, in New York, for example, we elected, I think, 6 or 7 new Republican House members. Granted, those districts were conservative, but they had been held by Democrats until that point. So you're going to see some swings when things go kind of back to where they are in the continuum. Whether it's a big surge of anti-incumbency, that's always predicted, but it never fully bears out as much as you think it's going to, simply because incumbents have so many advantages. They've got name recognition, they've got more money, they've got the infrastructure of the party behind them. It's not as ironclad as it used to be that if you're an incumbent, you're going to get reelected, but it's still probably going to be the case.
And it feels more trench warfare this time than it does like mobile armies. It just feels like the range is more narrow. I think Democrats really feel like they'll get 25 to 28.
Yeah, let's take 2 or 3 more, and then intern Brian.
Intern.
His first name's not really intern, but he's known that way.
I just wanted to go back to healthcare for a second. A lot of people have been talking about how much it'll affect Obama's presidency and his reelection, but I was wondering, how much do you think it'll affect Romney's chances and the Republican side of things, especially in regard to the individual mandate and how that's been brought into a lot of the debates?
I don't think it'll affect it at all. If Romney is the nominee, I don't see it as a big issue between the two of them.
In the primary,
Oh, in the primary?
Yeah,
sorry. I mean, I think it's probably the #1 reason Romney doesn't have this locked up. More than the fact that he's a Mormon, more than he flipped on abortion. I mean, you talk to voters, they know it. I mean, they can read you the entire act practically, and they've known it for 4 years. And he's never given a good enough answer to satisfy the skeptics in the Republican Party. #1 issue for him.
Okay. Yep. Sorry, Ian. Yep.
I'd like the panel's thoughts on the impact and effect of bad polling, or let's say the dark side of polling, when Rasmussen puts out a poll on one side or PPP on
I thought we
the
were going to
other
have to kill your mic for a second.
Does it make a difference?
For those of you who remember the 1964 Republican convention. No. So the impact of junk polls, not.
Well, I only talk to you, so I know nothing about that.
Well, we had this scandal with Delali's firm. I'm less concerned with junk polling than irresponsible aggregation of polling. I love Nate Silver; he's really interesting, and I love sabermetrics in baseball. But I can tell you this agglomeration of all this polling to draw these conclusions about things that are otherwise subjective. So I think less than bad polling, because there's so much polling out there at this point in time. And I think people are probably not clued into which ones are sort of robo. But I think, do you agree with me, like the accumulation of this and drawing conclusions in the macro can be very dangerous too?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
I think it's tough to be a consumer of polling. When we look at the robo-polls and the polls that are just done electronically, they are just able to dial landline numbers, for instance, because of FCC regulations, you cannot electronically dial a cell phone. And right now, the I think the proportion of cell phone only households is now 30% and inching over that. So in that sense, you are really not dealing with a very large proportion of the population. Not as big a problem in Republican primaries because that's not necessarily the part of the electorate that is on cell phones. It tends to be younger, somewhat more Democratic. But those differences are really muting, and so that in itself is
Okay.
perilous.
I want to take the last question from Mike, and then we'll wrap it.
So I just had a question that really goes back to this gentleman's previous question. Involved with really incredibly low scores of Congress's approval rating. I just wonder, which side in the presidential election do you think is going to use that to advantage more, as in blaming the other side? Do you think that'll be more Obama or more potentially Romney or whoever the Republican president will be to use that more against the candidate?
Oh, I think Romney is going to, or whoever is the Republican nominee will pretend they have nothing to do with congressional Republicans. And I think the president will say, you like what you got here in Congress? Well, elect this Republican. It's already playing out in the primary. Perry, just because I wrote a little story about this today, Perry's got an ad up where he bashes Congress. He bashes the president too, but he's like, I'm gonna go to Washington, clear the whole place out, cut their pay, and send them home. And like, my God, this is a Republican House. I mean, he's talking about his people. So they know where the public's mind is on this.
Is that ultimately going to be Obama's opponent, Congress, as opposed to whomever the Republican nominee is?
I think Washington, I mean, it's the only opportunity he still has to credibly say that he's running away from Washington. A quick anecdote, I was out on a bus tour with Obama, an endless bus tour in Virginia and North Carolina, and I was standing next to a senior administration official, and I said, why don't you invite Boehner or McConnell to come along on one of these trips and see this, And they looked at me like I had 9 heads. They said, we don't want to be in the frame with these people. We want to be as far away from them as possible.
Interesting.
I also followed Rick Perry's today thing about. He also said he's never been a member of Congress. He's never been a lobbyist. He basically listed all the other Republicans. He's never been any of them.
He's never been a woman either.
But his proposal to cut the pay of Congress and reminded me of President Lamar Alexander's slogan,
Right.
"Cut their pay and send them home."
Oh, that's
and
right.
Then, as soon as Lamar's presidential campaign collapsed and he became a member of Congress, he dropped that proposal.
How about that?
I won't let this panel.
figure.
I won't let this panel disperse without one final question. If I were to be invited to the inauguration of the next president, I open up the envelope maybe around January 1st of 2013. Who will be the person who sends me that invitation?
I'm not taking that one first.
The chair of the inaugural committee.
Anybody want to weigh in?
Chris Christie. Are you crazy?
All right, we'll take that as a pass unless someone wants to. Our encouragement, however, is regardless of who you do support, make sure, of course, you vote. And we encourage you to vote for whoever's ahead in the Maris-McClatchy. This would work well for us, so that we're not doing the thing we hate the most, which is why the polls were wrong. But anyway, tonight we had a great time. I want to thank you all so much. I want to thank the audience as well. I want to turn it back to Chris.
Thank you so much. Let's give one more round of applause to Lee, Barbara, all of our panelists for a fantastic conversation. We really appreciate all of the time and energy and effort that's required to pull off an evening like tonight, and we're just so grateful for all that you bring and the wonderful partnership that you offer all of us. We're delighted that you took the time to join us tonight, to share your evening with us on a wet, soggy Wednesday night. And we want to invite you to join us in the lobby for a reception immediately following. Before I do that, though, I do want to, again, extend thanks to the members of the MIPO team who worked diligently to prepare tonight's function, the members of the advancement team who did the same. And again, please join us for further conversation with all the panelists in the lobby right now for a reception. Thanks again and have a great night.
Thank you. Oh, thank you, guys.